folks. Saber4 here, back with part 3 of our Ultimate Star Wars Unlimited Jump to Lightspeed deck guide. We are looking at meta beating strategies, and this time we are going to talk about Bossk, and I added in a 6th here, even though we said 5 meta beating strategies. And we're going to talk about the green-blue villainy shell. So, our contents here. We did Quinlan, Voss, and Sabine in part 1. We have done Han and Cad Bane in part 2. And in this part, we are going to look at, as I said, Bossk and the blue-green villainy shell. We'll talk about weaknesses that are in those meta decks. And then I've got a couple of these decks here. The Thinking Takes Too Long, Action Gets Things Done, which is Bossk Blue. And Those Rebels Won't Escape Us, which is going to be a Piett deck. Let's dive right in. I'm not going to talk about this too much. We have covered the expected new meta several times now. And this is just what is in the other sets. So Quinlan Voss, already a strong performer. Sabine Wren, strong performer since the beginning. Part 2 covered Han, and we covered both Han in yellow and in green. And then Cad Bane, 2 very powerful mid-range decks. Cad Bane bleeding over a little bit in because we covered him in both red and blue. And so bleeding in a little bit because we look at blue in Cad Bane as a little bit more of a control type of deck. Part 3 is going to look at hard control versus soft control and talk a little bit about each of those. Let's move on through here. The weaknesses in the meta decks. We know the pillars. So we know that aggression, mid-range control, and that paper, rock, scissors approach that it has. And we've talked about this slide as well. You have kind of subtypes in there. Understanding your main pillar and the weaknesses of your opponent's decks is the key to attacking them well. So take a look at what they are and understand what each individual kind of leader and pair tends to be, and then knowing how those decks operate. So, are they based on hand disruption? Are they based on tempo? Are they based on combos? Are they based on ramp? And how do we attack that particular pillar? So for hand disruption, we talked about using things like smuggle. For tempo, we talked about how we can kind of adjust the curve back in our favor or get more units on the board than they can deal with. For combos, we talked about how we can kind of avoid some of that and using our particular strategies to be able to make them 2-for-1 themselves. And then for ramp decks, we're looking at things like Champs and Dula, which allow us to kind of catch back up, or how we can deal with some of those bigger game units that we have to navigate around by getting in under them, by getting in under that curve. As we said, to beat any deck, we understand our pillar and we understand how to attack their structure. So let's talk about Bossk Blue. Bossk Blue is a hard control deck that has done fairly well. The deck that we'll show is actually the one that won the Liverpool sectional. They use event-based removal. They keep the board very small. They're going to put bounties on things to heal back up a little bit. They're going to wind up shrinking some units and exhausting them. And that can be good because if you just straight remove every unit that's there, you never get a unit to put a bounty on. And so they do want to keep some units around that they can play into a little bit and remove easily and know that they can remove them so that they can collect their bounties. They really want to double collect at least once, typically on Death Mark if they have managed to keep damage to a minimum, but they also are able to stabilize through top target if you have put a lot into them. These boss decks have a very, very limited unit presence. It is all geared toward the late game. I did an entire video on Bossk, did a deep dive on him, and covered both Bossk Blue and Green. So I would very much encourage you, if you are interested in a much longer explanation of Bossk, to go and take a look at that. The sideboard in this is mostly focused on Bossk mirrors because you're running hard control, and you're going to run hard control against everything that's out there. The only thing that you're worried about with that hard control deck is playing another hard control deck. Milling is a common victory condition in this deck. Getting somebody where you have controlled the board, controlled the board, controlled the board, played vigilance, gotten 6 cards out of their deck, done it again, and now they're 18 cards shorter than you are. These games are very lengthy. Understand that if you're sitting down across from a Bossk Blue deck or a similar hard control deck, and you start to get to that 15, 17, 20-minute game, the likelihood that you're going to finish 3 of a best of 3 is pretty low. So if you're in a situation where you're 12 minutes in a tournament and you are not winning game 1, but you have a good strategy to beat this in your sideboard, it could be wise to scoop game 1, knowing that you have a better strategy once you are post board. So let's take a look at the example deck. This is Ali G's deck that won in Liverpool. I covered this in the Bossk deep dive. You'll notice that it has in here top target for healing. It has in here Death Mark for card draw, and then Restock to be able to kind of play the mirror a little bit, but Vigilance as well to be able to pull, Vigilance back or pull any of the other stuff back. Take a look at the units. The Client, Emperor Palpatine, Supreme Leader Snoke, Avenger. 4 units, and only, 11 of them. A 12th unit being the Bossk leader, and that's it for the deck. Everything else in here, everything else are either bounties or removal. And so this is very, very much geared to control the board 1 for 1, with Super Laser Blast being kind of the lone exception, and to just stretch to that long game. The sideboard, as you see, there's a little bit of nod given here in the sideboard with Cham Syndulla, where if somebody is ramping very aggressively and they need to kind of catch back up, but then everything else, here's card draw, here's stopping an early attack, Lieutenant Chilton, who is a nice stopper there, and then Bounty Hunter crew. In my versions of this, I have run Bazine as well in my sideboard, kind of in place of some of that extra card draw, but that's again more a nod to the mirror where I want to try and rip Restock. Playing into Bossk, you prefer to be an aggro player, and the thing that you're wanting to do is that you are wanting to make sure that you can put more units on the board at once that you can swing with than Bossk can control at one time. Do not put pilots on vehicles into Bossk. Don't do it. Unless you are talking about putting Chewbacca on something that he is going to have a tough time removing. The reason for that is that easily allows Bossk to 2 for 1 what you're doing. So you put you put your A-Wing down and you put Biggs in it. Great. Bossk thanks you, because what you've done is that you have allowed him to use 1 removal card, power the dark side. 2 of your cards went away. That's a big win for that deck. Do not pilot your vehicles against hard control. You should be thinking, what is the earliest turn that I can play multiple units so that his removal does not get rid of my entire play? Especially if Bossk Blue is playing on if he's not gotten card draw yet, or if he's playing on Colossus, you have the opportunity early on to kind of burn through his removal, put down extra stuff, and just attack. Take that aggressive stance and work your way through it. Alternately, if you have some kind of bounce effects, are there ways that I can get rid of those bounties that he really needs to double collect? Can I waylay my own unit, pull it back to hand, and get rid of something that Bossk is trying to do? That's still a 1 for 1 removal of one of his cards, but it's a 1 for 1 removal that works to your advantage. Playing your curve plays into 1-to-1, because if you, as Sabine, make logical progress and you go Battlefield Marine, Fleet Lieutenant, Sabine flip, great. Now we've got our first time that we have a second unit. Poe, Wrecker, if he dealt with each of those in succession, then you're only ever going to get ahead on a couple of attacks. And if Bossk is able, especially as those units become named, to put one of his draw effects or a top target on it, then, he's recovering a lot of health, and you're going to wind up in a long game against Bossk, which is something you're not built for. As I said, consider using bounce effects on your own units to as upgrade hate. Is another thing that you can do, is to get rid of those bounties, as long as it's not the client. But in a mirror, I talked already about Bazine. You can pull that in if you've put it in your sideboard. Bounty Hunter Crew, even though both of those are out of aspect, you'll have enough resources against another Bossk deck to be able to play them with ease. Bounty Hunter Crew, your target is to get back your restock. Bazine, your target is to strip their restock, because you're going to play a mill game. There's just no two ways about that. Be very aware against Bossk, deploying multiple units into 8 or greater resources. Bossk is probably just going to simply reset the board with a super laser blast. If you've got 3 units out there, or you just, you finish the 7 resource turn and you churn down 3 quick units, maybe you win off of it, maybe you don't. If that's the way you're betting, that he maybe doesn't have that super laser, good. If he didn't draw it, if he didn't get it, you might win off of that. But beware, if he's going into 8 and anything beyond, Bossk may elect to just reset the board, especially if his units aren't out there. And as we see, all of his units, the majority of them, come in at 8 or later. So he's probably going to play Super Laser Blast as his 8 resource play, rather than play one of his units down. Let's look a little bit further. We're going to talk about Piett Blue, but we're going to talk about Piett Blue as a part of a bigger shell, and that is the soft control shell, something that is not as focused on one-to-one removal, is going to be a little bit more unit heavy, and is going to be able to turn a little bit differently. This still does fairly well against a mid-range deck, but has a little bit better play into some of the hard aggression decks that are out there. There are many versions of this. We have seen decks like this around since set 1. Krennic was a big thing in set 1. You saw Kiara take off a little bit. We've seen various versions of Palpatine do this, and now we have Piett added to that same shell. The green versions of the leader are likely to run on a Colossus, just to gain. They can gain back some card advantage later on, but they are okay with a 5-card hand in many cases. The blue leaders are likely to play ECL. Iden is the one kind of variable there. She is quite likely at times to play double blue. But even there, that's kind of what we are. Now, I'll say this. This is probably one of the decks that I'm most familiar with. I was an Iden blue player in set 1, with a little splash of playing Krennic. I would oscillate back and forth with Krennic between playing him with ECL, playing him a little bit in double blue, playing him with just straight green. When Kiara came around, I switched off of Krennic to Kiara. I still played Iden. I've played Palpatine. I've played Palpatine in double green. I've played Palpatine in blue. So this is a deck that I am very familiar with. Almost always, every single one of these is going to play a ramp package of some kind. It is probably biggest in Piett because he had the most help with some of those new capital ships, and he can resource cheat into them. But you still have a lot of one-for-one removal options. A little less so than the hard control, but still very aggressively able to remove units as they need to. Overwhelming Barrage is a big thing in here because we are playing blue-green, and they may use that to clear the field, buff one of their units, get out a big swing, and then after that, that's their card to turn the corner with. Very popular combo in here, and especially if you're playing against Krennic, is going to see Darth Vader looking for a Death Trooper, and that allows the Death Trooper to do 2 damage. It can do 2 damage to Vader, and you can wind up with a Vader that swings for 8 and still dealt 2 to something else. So Darth Vader can come out at times and 2 for 1, and leave behind both the Darth Vader unit and another card. Deeper blue versions of this, ones that play a little bit less green, are likely to also run Lieutenant Jilson. A blue version, go ahead and expect him. But if they hold back a turn 1 play, it's likely because they are looking to play a little bit more on the control side early. They might be looking at removal, or they might be gearing towards that 6/6 Sentinel. They've got several of these have a very impressive leader flip. Piett is not an impressive flip as a leader, but he resource cheats a lot. And so if you have Piett on the board as a leader unit, he can really aggressively start to get bigger. Krennic is, again, a pretty safe flip, but not as impactful to the board immediately. Now, if he sits there and is allowed to attack and is allowed to stay on the board, he's going to keep restoring, and that's problematic. Kira is probably the most impactful leader flip outside of Palpatine, just because she's going to come down and damage everything. But each of these has a game-changing leader flip, as they should. That's what your leader should do. But each of them operates slightly differently because of how their leaders operate. I'm going to use Admiral Piett, as I said, as an example. I have played many, many of these decks. It is the most common thing that I play. Let's take a look at the Admiral Piett shell. Here we see that you've got a nice package of smaller units leading into super laser techs and resupply. If you have a unit that you really feel the need to remove, you can come down with it and deal with that kind of early. The most common play here is to go Pike Sentinel if they don't put down something that you think is going to survive that interaction, that the super laser tech can interact with. They may play resupply on that second turn if the Sentinel is going to survive, or they'll look to play Pershing and look to start kind of pinging their own units to get card draw if they're not concerned about your first turn unit. They move very quickly into takedown. There's 3 of Vigilance in this deck. There's a lot of No Glory, and then Overwhelming Barrage, which I said is the turn card for them. If they can get to the point of their leader flip and resupply carrier or something like that, or larger, and then Overwhelming Barrage off of it, they're in great position. Darth Vader picks up any of those 2 and 3 cost units because, with the exception of Yularen, they are all villainy. And good luck if they pick up Piett, because that just gives everything at the back half of their game ambush. Now, you'll notice that this has a lot of ramp built in because that's how Piett operates. The others are unlikely to put in resupply carrier, and they are Quinton's cruisers. So they're not quite as heavily dependent on that. A couple of kind of control things that you could see out of the sideboard, or some stabilization you could see out of the sideboard. Regional governors would kind of lock down any one particular play. They are, again, not a Vader target, but they can do a lot of heavy lifting by keeping you from playing, or keeping you from playing because you're the opponent of this deck. Any kind of card that's really specific to how you operate. You're sitting across from Quinlan and you don't want Admiral Piett immediately killed. Well, regional governor, you put them down and you name Plo Koon. So the Death Troopers that are in there can come in, combo with Darth Vader, easily remove a 7 health leader, which is about the biggest most people are running right now. If you have something that's trying to do a little bit more control and you need to just kind of clear the board a little bit, I'll play Planetary Bombardment for 8. You leave a resupply carrier, you leave an Arquittan's cruiser out, you leave any of those things up there, and I have no problem with that. Fleet Interdictors against a similar type of deck. That's a kind of concession to the mirror. being able to block off some of those attacks, and then reinforcement walkers, your great stability piece. Playstyle differs based on leaders. Palpatine wants to turn units. He needs to sacrifice units because that's how he card draws. Piett resource cheats. Kiara is likely to play a heavier suite of things like Grit, so she's going to play Hylabon Enforcers. She's going to play the Devastating Gunship. She's going to play other things like that that have Grit on them, and then is able to kind of put her shield on a thing, have it increase its strength. Krennic is looking for damaged units, and he might put out Dr. Pershing and use that to increase his own value. Iden will use a little bit more unit based and use trades, especially if she's in green. And she is quite willing to trade a unit into yours because that means that she gets to heal. The counter to ramp, if you are playing red at all, is Chamsandula. You want to, if he's in your sideboard and you're in red at all, you should have at least 2 of them in there. He's a strong enough body at 4. He catches up a resource. He's a great play. If you are playing hand disruption, you want to limit their choices. A very well-timed thing like a Spark of Rebellion or Bazine forces them to play honest, which is to say forces them to play on the same resource turn as you for longer. And so if you are, you're not ever going to get rid of Piett's resource cheat. It's just not going to happen. But you can get rid of a super laser technician or get rid of a resupply and keep that game on curve longer. And playing an honest game with them is something that these decks can struggle with, because their end game is bigger, their end game is better, their end game is deeper. And if they manage to reach that end game where they are closing you out with those big high power units, unless you can get through the 10 of a Devastator, it's going to come back and swing for 10. And it's a Sentinel. So, good luck. It also eliminated something as it came in. So it's a big, big hit if Admiral Piett can put that out on 8 resources. And especially big if Admiral Piett can put that out on 8 resources after he has gone resupply into resupply carrier. And now he's 2 ahead. So he's doing that while you're on 6. And that's a huge problem. But that's kind of playing against the global soft control shell. But like I said, just realize that well-timed disruption of ramp or catching back up on ramp is a good counter. Understand what the different versions of soft control are trying to do is kind of key to what they're there. These struggle, and I mean these really can struggle into hard control because they're pushing out usually single units in a turn, and in doing so, hard control can really stymie what they're trying to do. I'm going to leave you with a couple last thoughts here. First off is that playing into a wider field, which we've talked about in each of these, with Jango out of the way, about half of you, if you sit down at a major tournament, are going to sit down across from Quinlan, Sabine, Han, Bossk, or Cad. Let's throw in a few others. You might see, as we said, a blue-green hero shell, blue-green villainy shell. You might see a Anakin Blue thrown in there. We'll cover Anakin Blue in a future video. We've got another week until Richmond anyway. The rest of you are going to be sitting across from something that is not one of those meta leaders. As a result, that's why I say that we talk about pillars and we talk about how the other parts of this work, how pillars work, and how we can attack different things. Understand our pillar, understand their structure. Attack their structure, attack their deck. So they still follow the major rules of those meta pillars. Understand that how the control pillar operates. Understand how the aggressive pillar operates. Take a look at parts 1 and 2 of this video, and we'll talk in depth about each of those. Know when to claim the initiative against control. This is probably one of the most important things that I can tell you. If you are sitting back and trying to use your extra action against control, that might mean the difference between swinging a unit and having the unit removed. So, what does that cost me? If Sabine wanted to come out and ping my deck, but left me an opportunity to clear their battlefield marine, I'm okay with that as a control player. That gave me +2. And if you continue to do that through the course of the game, the control player is going to be a very, very happy player. If you are smart about it and you continue to control initiative and you are able to swing your larger unit that I was not able to remove yet, you are going to put more pressure on the control player. Understand that the field is much more open. And to tell you how much more open it is, the 7 majors, the combined data from them, there were 859 mirror matches of Jango Red versus Jango Red. The next most represented was Quinlan, and that's Quinlan Tarkentown or Quinlan Red at 140. So there is such a substantial gap there. There's a 700 plus game gap in the most common mirror and the next most common mirror. So you're going to see a lot more diversity happen, even though we expect that there is going to be a heavy, heavy presence of Quinlan and Sabine. Understand the pillars, understand the structure, attack the structure with your pillar. Big play numbers when we're talking about control: 7 for Darth Vader or for Maul for their big ambush units, or if you're playing against Piett, 7 is turbo laser salvo. So if he's got even even if he's got just a resupply carrier on the board, everything after 7, he can turbo laser salvo and do area of effect damage to either ground or space. 8 is super laser blast if they're looking to reset the board. It's also the jump to light speed devastator if they are playing red. It's Supreme Leader Snoke, it's Emperor Palpatine, and it's Reinforcement Walker. So it's their biggest piece of stability in a lot of cases. In a mirror match with control, 9 is Relentless. And if you were playing a control mirror, you better be playing Relentless. And then 10 is Devastator. So check out parts 1 and 2. I will link the decks. I will link the other resources that I have used throughout these videos, all in the description. And we'll come back next week talking about some more decks and talking about some other things. We've got several that are planned. There's a poll up on the site right now between what decks you would like to see next. And so if you would like to, go check that out. But that's all we've got for today. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and we will see you next time.